So here we are, moving along in Mark. We're at chapter 8, starting with verse 1, another feeding. Not as big as the first, but it was a mighty big feeding. In Mark 8, 1-9, it says, "In those days, the multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days, and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar." Then the disciples answered him, "How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness?" He asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" And they said, 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away. The feeding of the 5,000, that took place in Galilee. It took place in the spring near Passover. If you remember, they had the green grass, and we had a picture of Jesus feeding his flock like a shepherd. And they took up 12 baskets left over, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. And it also symbolized that Jesus is the bread of life. The feeding of the 4,000 is taking place in Decapolis. Looking at Mark chapter 7, verse 31, just to remind you, it says, "Again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee." And what time of the year is this? Well, it says that they sat on the ground. So I imagine the grass had died off. And so it's moving further along in the year. And there's no cities nearby. They said it's a desolate place. So they couldn't even say, what are we, to go into town and buy food? There was no town nearby. The crowd had been with Jesus for about 3 days. I mean, this is a hungry crowd. The people were not asked to sit in groups as the Jews were. Remember, Jesus told them to set them in groups of 50 and 100. He just told them, just sit on the ground. In fact, he didn't even tell the disciples to tell them anything. He just told them, sit on the ground. And so they found 7 loaves, and they found some fish, and guess what? There was 7 baskets left over. Not the 12, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, but 7, representing the fullness of God. Jesus is coming for the whosoever will may come. This crowd doesn't try to make Jesus king. They don't know that Jesus is coming. They don't know the Messiah is coming. They're Gentiles. So they didn't try to make him king because they didn't have any knowledge of the coming Messiah. But at this feeding, just like the previous feeding, the disciples served the food. These are going to be the shepherds that Jesus is going to be using to feed his sheep. And Jesus was feeding the crowds both times for only one reason. He had compassion on them. Sometimes we forget how much compassion the Lord has for us. So after this feeding, and everybody was full, starting with verse 10 in chapter 8, it says, "Immediately got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side." So we can see that Jesus is back in the area where the Jews live because the Pharisees are there, and they're commanding all Jesus' attention. They're not allowing him to preach to the multitudes. They're questioning him. They're trying to find fault with him. And they want Jesus, show us some spectacular event. Let us see some great, wondrous thing, prove to us that you're the Son of God. This would be similar to when Satan told Jesus, turn the stones into bread. Let's see your miraculous power at work. But Jesus didn't turn stones into bread. He multiplied the bread. He took the bread that was there, and it just kept coming and just kept coming. But you know, if you really get to looking into the things of the Bible, it's the Antichrist, the one that's going to be anti-God, you might say, the one that's against God. The Antichrist, he's going to be doing signs and wonders for people. And the people that don't believe in Jesus, they're going to eat it up. Matthew gives us a little insight when he said, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Even the elect, if possible. Now, there's believers today that get deceived by this and by that and by the other thing, and Satan is doing his work, but it's not the great deception. We always pray, God, forgive me for being deceived. How did I fall into that trap? How did I believe those people? And so on and so forth, and for the deceptions that come our way. But the deception, there's no forgiveness for us if you fall into that trap that says Jesus is not the Christ. The Antichrist is the Christ. Look at what he's doing, the wonderful signs and wonders. So we want to be careful. Let's not look for signs and wonders. Jesus said, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given them except the prophet of Jonah. What's the prophet of Jonah's sign? How long was Jonah in the belly of the fish? 3 days. Jesus will be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave and rise again. Jonah was vomited out. Jesus just rose again. Jesus is not a magician. He's not out there to dazzle people. He's out there to say, I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus is the only sign that we're going to get. Man says, show me, and I'll believe. Jesus says, believe, and I will show you. So Mark chapter 8, verse 13. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have any more than 1 loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we have no bread? But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, how is it you do not understand? Jesus isn't going to waste any more time arguing with the Pharisees. He's getting away from them. It's kind of a witness to us, arguing with someone that's not believing and only going to come up with all kinds of crazy excuses. I had a person say, well, if Jesus can do anything, why can't he make a rock so big he can't lift it? Now, how stupid is that? It just gets them more confirmed. Oh, I sure stumped that Christian with that question. No, they didn't. But there's no use trying to reach them. They need their heart broke down, crushed up a little bit, turned into soil so we can plant a seed. So the leaven of the Pharisees, what is that? Signs, hypocrisy, traditions, unbelief, hardness of heart. The list goes on. Just as leaven makes the bread rise, the doctrine of the Pharisees makes unbelief rise. He says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Don't let that unbelief get into your heart and rise up and cause you to doubt what God can do. So they're still looking at the natural things of earth and not the heavenly things. That's why Jesus says, don't you yet understand? Can't you remember? They worried about how much bread they brought. I just took 7 loaves and multiplied it for 4,000 5,000 people. You think I can't take one loaf and multiply it for 12? Starting with verse 22, it says, Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. Then he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town. But what's the purpose? Why did he take him out of Bethsaida? Why didn't he just go ahead and do the miracle right there in town? Well, Jesus was having a little problem with Bethsaida. And a few other cities. In Matthew, he screamed out in chapter 11, Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles had occurred in Tyre and Sidon, which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. So no more works were going to be done in Bethsaida. So after he healed this man, he just told him, go home. Don't even go through the town. He didn't want the people in town knowing what's going on. And it's kind of interesting. You wonder, why did Jesus spit in this man's eyes? This is similar to when Jesus healed the deaf man. He spat and touched the deaf man's tongue and put his fingers in his ears. These things come about, the only thing that we can really bring to mind is he's building up their faith. When you start to feel or see something's taking place, something's going on, kind of like you go to the doctor, you say, oh, I got this problem in my ear. And he doesn't look in your ear. You kind of wonder, well, why did I go? He didn't even look in my ear. But when he starts looking in your ear, you say, oh, there's a little hope he's going to find out what's wrong with my ear. Well, these people are in the same way. And Jesus takes and touches their eyes and lets them know something's taking place and builds up their faith in Jesus. This is the only miracle that recorded in the Bible where Jesus healed in stages. The man saw men like trees walking. So Jesus laid his hands on him again, and he saw everything clearly. And I think Jesus is showing you, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Let's not give up on praying for people. When you see them starting to get well, pray all the more. Let's get them all the way well. Amen.